All right, we ready to go, Carol?
Uh-huh.
All right. All right, let me do my share screen here, see if I can get that right. All right. Did I do it right, Carol?
That's good. Looks good.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Roger Harris. I've served as the parliamentarian for a number of years now with the NCRSP. I never want to embellish my resume, though. I want to be upfront and say I am not a licensed parliamentarian, but I am a member of the North Carolina Association of Parliamentarians and the National Association of Parliamentarians, and I've done this for a while. So I just want to give you kind of an overview, as very briefly this morning, about some basics of parliamentary procedure. I'll probably go over some stuff that you already know, but that's okay. Sometimes it's good to be reminded of things that we've got. So let's just go ahead and get started. One of the first things I like to think about is who in the world is this Robert? We've always heard of Robert's Rules of Order, and we do have to have rules. There's different kinds of rules. If you ever watch C-SPAN, first of all, bless your heart, but if you ever watch C-SPAN, you know that the House and the Senate have their own rules. They talk about, I'm yielding my time to this gentleman and that gentleman. Different organizations have their own rules, and most organizations have their own rules, and that will take priority over Roberts, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But Robert's Rules of Order goes back to the Greeks and then the English Parliament, and the English Parliament really started, and that's why we call it today parliamentary procedure, because it goes back to the British Parliament. And if we think about who in the world this Robert guy was, he was a Civil War general. His name was Henry Martin Robert. He was from the U.S. Army, a brigadier general, and he came up with these rules to really help with church organizations. And his first book was 50 pages, and then it went up to 176 pages. He's obviously long dead now, but the book now is in its 12th edition, and it's almost 700 pages. Now, quite honestly, nobody is going to be able to master 700 pages. But the good news is this: you only use about 10% of Robert's Rules of Order most of the time. So that's all you really need to do to be able to run an effective meeting. And I assume that most folks in this group today are either regional directors or local unit presidents. So you don't have to memorize all this stuff, and we're just going to go over some basic things. If we think of the purpose of parliamentary procedure, it's really a practice of democracy. Excuse me, let me stop my phone there. It's a practice of democracy. It allows for an orderly discussion and debate in a group. It protects the rights of the minority, and it allows for the will of the majority to rule. We want the majority to rule. That's an essence of democracy. But the minority has a right to be heard. And sometimes you can hear the minority and agree with them, and the minority becomes a majority. So that's why we do this. There are 3 different documents that we look at in our organization having to do with the priority of parliamentary procedure. And they are in order: the NCRSP Constitution, the bylaws, and then Robert's Rules of Order. Now, what I mean by priority is this. When I was a little boy and I wanted to climb a tree, if my big brother said I could climb the tree, but my mama said I could not climb the tree, who's going to win? Mama, isn't she? Because mama has priority over my brother. That's the way it is with these documents. The Constitution, our NCRSP Constitution, that's at the top. That's the mama. That one has control over everything. Under that is the bylaws, which means if there is a conflict between the Constitution and the bylaws, the Constitution wins. And then third is Robert's Rules of Order. That's third in place. If there's a conflict between Robert's Rules of Order and our Constitution, the Constitution wins. Those are our priorities we look at. And most of what we do has to do with the motion. Most motions that you hear in any group are going to begin with these 3 words. Somebody will stand up and they will say, I move that, and then it'll get started. Almost all those motions take the same way, and there's some certain principles that we look at with those motions. First, you state clearly what the organization is to do, not a vague idea. As an example, if somebody says, I make a motion that we support public education. That's not clear, is it? That's a vague idea. So that motion would be out of order. It has to be something very clear. And here's an example, and the one that we're going to look at in our presentation today. Somebody stands up and says in the organization, I move that we increase dues by $10 effective January 1st, 2025. That's very clear, isn't it? It tells exactly what they want to do and exactly when they want it to start. Somebody else says, I second the motion. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they agree that that motion is a good idea. The only thing a second means is just, I think that's worthy of discussion. Okay? That's all it means. I think we should talk about that. That's worthy of discussion. When it finally gets down to the vote, that person that seconded may vote against it. Only thing they're saying is, I second the motion, which means I think it's worthy of discussion. Now, if you're the president or the chairman and you don't get a second, that motion dies. And what you say is the motion dies for lack of a second. But somebody seconds the motion, and then you as chairman, you state that motion to the body to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. So you say something like this: it is moved and seconded that we increase dues by $10 effective January 1st, 2025. All right, so there's three different steps then. You got a maker of the motion, a second of the motion,